Rina's world was filled with silence and pain. Every morning began the same way. The harsh sound of the overseer's horn echoed through the stone chambers where she and the others slept. The horn meant it was time to rise, time to work, time to endure another day. Rina never asked questions anymore. Questions only brought punishment. She had learned long ago that it was safer to remain quiet, to move when told, and to keep her eyes low. The empire that ruled her world was powerful and cruel. They had come many years ago, their ships covering the skies like shadows. Her people had resisted at first, but they had no chance. Their weapons were simple compared to the invaders. One by one, their cities had fallen, and soon their lives were no longer their own. Now, Rina and the rest of her kind were slaves. They were forced to build structures for the empire, to dig deep into the earth, and to carry heavy stones until their bodies ached. Rina was small compared to many others, but her strength had kept her alive. Each day she carried baskets of ore from the mines to the furnaces. The dust from the mines coated her skin, and her back was scarred from the lash of the overseer's whip. She had no family left. Her parents had fallen during the first battles, and her younger brother had been taken away years ago. Sometimes, at night, she wondered if he still lived, but the thought was too painful, so she tried not to think at all. The only way she had survived was by hardening her heart. She did not smile. She did not laugh. She kept her face calm, her voice silent, and her steps steady. Yet deep inside, she carried something fragile. It was not hope, not really, but a quiet longing. She longed for a world where voices were soft instead of harsh, where hands were gentle instead of cruel, where life was not only pain. She had never known such a world, but her heart whispered that it might exist somewhere. That morning was no different from countless others. The overseers shouted, their voices sharp and commanding. The slaves lined up, carrying their tools. Rina lifted her basket, heavier than before, and forced herself to move. Her body hurt, but she did not slow down. To fall behind was dangerous. The overseers watched every step, and they punished weakness without hesitation. Hours passed. The sun rose high, pouring heat onto the barren land. Rina's throat was dry, but she had no water. Her arms shook, but she kept walking. The path from the mines to the furnaces was long, and the stones cut her feet. Around her, others struggled too. An old man stumbled and dropped his load. The overseer struck him until he could rise again. No one dared to help. To help was to share the punishment. Rina lowered her eyes and kept moving. She wanted to help, but fear kept her still. When she finally reached the furnaces, she dropped her basket onto the pile of ore. The heat burned her skin as sparks flew, but she did not step back. Instead, she turned to walk the long path again. Her body felt like stone, heavy and slow, but she forced herself onward. Day after day, year after year, she had done the same. This was her life, and she could not imagine it ever changing. As evening came, the slaves were gathered again. The overseers counted them, shouting if someone moved too slowly. Rina stood in line, her head bowed, her arms trembling from the long hours of labor. She felt the ache in her back and the sting of fresh wounds, but she did not make a sound. Silence was safer. Pain was normal. She accepted both as part of her existence. That night, she sat on the cold floor of the sleeping chamber. The room was filled with the quiet breathing of others, but no one spoke. Speech had become rare among her people. Words had lost their meaning when there was no freedom, no joy, no reason to share thoughts. Rina rested her head against the wall and closed her eyes. She thought of nothing, because thinking of dreams or memories only brought sorrow. It was easier to empty her mind. Yet, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, the same small whisper stirred within her heart. It told her that somewhere beyond the mines, beyond the chains, beyond the endless cruelty, there might be something different. She had no proof. She had never seen kindness, never felt gentleness, never heard a soft voice speak her name. But still, the whisper remained, fragile but steady. Perhaps one day, she would understand why it had never left her. For now, all she knew was pain. The sky above Rina's world was always filled with smoke. The furnaces burned without pause, and the mines never rested. Day after day, the people labored, and night after night, they returned to their stone chambers in silence. None of them looked to the stars anymore. The stars were reminders of the Empire's ships, of the invaders who had stolen their freedom. To Rina, the sky was only another weight pressing down upon her. She never thought that anything from above could bring hope. Far away, beyond her broken world, a human exploration ship traveled through the system. Its name was Aurora, and its crew had come to chart new paths among the stars. They were not warriors, nor conquerors. They were explorers, seekers of knowledge. But the galaxy often revealed more than maps and minerals. Sometimes, it revealed suffering. Sometimes, it revealed the cruelty of empires. On the bridge of the Aurora, Mark stood quietly at his station. He was not the commander, but he was respected by his team for his calm nature and steady courage. He had served on several missions before, and though he was not a man of many words, he carried a strong sense of justice. When the Aurora's sensors picked up strange signals from a nearby planet, Mark was one of the first to notice. The readings showed life, but also heavy machinery, energy spikes, and unusual patterns of distress. The captain ordered a closer approach. As the ship descended into orbit, the crew saw the truth on their screens. They saw endless mines carved into the earth, chains upon the people, and overseers shouting commands. They saw suffering laid bare. The crew fell silent. This was not the discovery they had expected, but it was one they could not ignore. Mark felt something stir within him as he watched. He had seen hardship before, but this was different. The faces of the enslaved carried no hope, no joy, only endless pain. And among those faces, the cameras captured one small figure struggling under the weight of a heavy basket. Her steps were slow, but steady. She did not cry out, though her back bent under the load. Something about her quiet endurance struck Mark deeply. He did not know her name, but he felt as though he could not look away. The captain debated what should be done. The empire that ruled this planet was known to be powerful and merciless. To interfere could mean danger. Yet to turn away felt like betrayal of everything they stood for. After long silence, the captain allowed a small survey team to land, to gather more information and perhaps find a way to help. Mark volunteered without hesitation. The shuttle descended in the cover of night. The team moved carefully, blending into shadows near the mines. From a distance, they saw the overseers driving the workers with shouts and strikes. The humans felt their anger rise, but they knew they must be cautious. One wrong step could endanger not only themselves, but also the very people they wished to save. Then, during the long hours of watching, it happened. Rina stumbled. She had carried too many loads that day, and her legs trembled beneath her. The overseer's voice rang out, filled with fury. He raised his weapon, and before Rina could rise, the strike fell. Pain shot through her, and she collapsed onto the ground. She closed her eyes, waiting for more punishment, waiting for the familiar sting that always followed weakness. But before the overseer could raise his hand again, a figure stepped forward. Mark could not remain still. His heart had already chosen for him. He rushed across the open ground, his movements faster than the overseer expected. He placed himself between Rina and the weapon, his body shielding her. The overseer shouted in shock, but Mark did not move away. Rina opened her eyes in confusion. She had never seen anyone stand in front of her like that. She did not understand who this man was, or why he would risk angering the overseer. All she knew was that his presence felt different. His hands did not strike her. Instead, one hand reached down, steady and careful, to help her rise. "Are you hurt?" Mark asked softly. His voice was calm, almost gentle. The words meant nothing to her, for she did not know his language, but the tone reached her heart. For the first time, someone was speaking to her without cruelty. His eyes held no anger, only concern. The overseer shouted again, calling for guards. The other humans from the shuttle moved quickly, covering Mark as he lifted Rina to her feet. She could barely stand, but his hand supported her with strength that did not feel harsh. She leaned against him without thinking, her mind spinning with disbelief. Why would a stranger care if she fell? Why would anyone protect her? The moment felt unreal, like a dream she had never dared to imagine. All her life, she had known only pain. And now, in the middle of the dust and smoke, someone had touched her with kindness. It was such a small thing, a hand reaching down, a voice speaking softly, but to Rina it was everything. It was the first crack in the wall of despair that had surrounded her for so long. The overseers grew furious, their shouts rising. The humans knew they could not remain hidden any longer. The time for watching had ended. The time for action had begun. And as Mark stood beside Rina, he made a silent promise in his heart. He did not know her name, nor her story, but he knew one truth: he would not let her suffer alone anymore. Rina could hardly breathe as the stranger's hand held hers. The world around her seemed to blur: the shouting overseers, the sound of boots striking the ground, the chaos of alarms echoing through the camp. None of it mattered in that moment. What filled her heart was the strange feeling of safety. She had never felt safe before, not once in her life, yet standing beside this human, she felt as though the pain might not last forever. Mark kept his grip steady, guiding her gently away from the overseer's reach. His other hand signaled to his team. They spread out quickly, forming a barrier between Rina and the guards rushing toward them. The humans carried weapons, but their movements were precise and careful. They were not reckless. They acted with purpose, as though every step was meant to protect, not to destroy. Rina's legs trembled. She wanted to run, but she had no strength left. Years of labor and wounds had left her weak, and her body ached from the overseer's strike. She expected the human to push her aside, to grow angry at her weakness. That was what she had always known: weakness brought punishment. But instead, Mark slowed his pace, supporting her weight with patience. His touch was firm, yet careful, as though he feared to hurt her even more. He spoke again, his voice quiet against the rising noise. Rina did not know his words, but she understood the tone. He was not shouting, not demanding, not scolding. His voice carried calmness, a promise that he meant no harm. The sound eased her heart in a way she had never believed possible. The overseers grew louder. One of them raised his weapon, aiming directly at Mark. Rina's eyes widened, fear surging within her. For the first time, she feared not for herself, but for him. Yet before the shot could be fired, one of the humans from the shuttle acted swiftly, disarming the overseer with a burst of light. The weapon clattered to the ground, useless. The overseer fell back in shock. Rina stared in disbelief. She had never seen anyone stand against the Empire's soldiers before. Her people had always lowered their heads, too broken to resist. But these humans fought back without hesitation, not for conquest, but to shield the weak. It was something she could barely understand. Mark bent slightly, lowering his face so Rina could see his eyes clearly. He pointed at himself, then at her, repeating a single word. She did not know its meaning, but the way he spoke it gentle and steady made her think it was his name. She whispered it back, unsure, her voice faint. He smiled. It was small, but it was real, and it was the first smile she had ever received in her life. Her chest tightened. Something fragile stirred within her heart, stronger than the whisper of longing she had carried for years. It was a spark of hope, sharp and bright, though she did not know if she could trust it. She feared it might vanish as quickly as it came. Yet she could not ignore it, not when his hand still held hers so carefully. The battle around them grew fiercer. The overseers called for reinforcements, and more guards began to flood the mining camp. The humans formed a circle, protecting both Mark and Rina as they moved toward the shuttle. Each step felt like a miracle to her. She had walked this ground 1,000 times before, always in chains, always in silence. Now, for the first time, she walked with someone who wanted her to stand, not to kneel. When they reached the shuttle's ramp, Rina hesitated. Fear filled her once again. She had never seen such a craft up close. To her, ships were symbols of conquest and slavery. They had brought only suffering to her world. What if this one was no different? What if this was another trap? Mark noticed her hesitation. He did not pull her forward. Instead, he stopped and faced her. Slowly, he released her hand, raising both palms to show they were empty. His eyes met hers, steady and calm. He spoke again, this time with even softer tones, as though trying to tell her that the choice was hers. Rina trembled. She had never been given a choice before. All her life, decisions were made for her: when to work, when to eat, when to sleep. Freedom had been nothing more than a distant dream. And now, here was a human waiting patiently, offering his hand but not forcing it. The moment stretched long, heavy with meaning. Her breath came unsteady. She glanced at the overseers in the distance, still shouting, still trying to break through the humans' defenses. Then she looked back at Mark, who stood without anger, without cruelty, simply waiting for her answer. Slowly, almost against her own fear, Rina lifted her hand again. She placed it in his. Mark's smile returned, warmer this time. He nodded once and guided her gently up the ramp. The shuttle's doors closed behind them, shutting out the noise of the camp. For the first time, the sound of overseers' shouts faded away. The walls of the shuttle held silence, a silence that felt strange but safe. Rina sat carefully on one of the seats, her eyes wide as she looked around at the strange lights and smooth walls. Her heart pounded, her mind filled with questions she could not speak. But when she looked at Mark, she saw no threat in his face. Only patience. Only calm. Only kindness. Her entire life, all she had known was pain. Yet in that single touch, in the gentle way he had lifted her from the ground, she discovered something new. It was small and fragile, but it was real. It was the beginning of hope. The shuttle shook as its engines roared to life. Rina clutched the seat with both hands, her heart pounding. She had never been inside such a machine before. Her people had only seen ships from far below as they descended from the skies, bringing soldiers and chains. Now, she was within one, not as a captive but as someone being carried away from the mines. The thought was so strange that she could hardly believe it was real. Mark stood near her, his eyes scanning the controls and his team. His calm presence eased her fear. Each time her hands trembled, she saw his steady movements and felt a little safer. He did not speak loudly, only giving short, firm words to his crew as they guided the shuttle upward. Outside, the overseers and guards shouted in anger. Some fired weapons toward the rising craft, but the humans were prepared. The shuttle's shields glowed faintly, protecting them as they lifted into the smoky sky. Rina pressed herself against the seat, her chest tight with fear, expecting the ship to fall at any moment. Yet it rose higher and higher, leaving the camp and its fires below. For the first time in her life, she was leaving the place where she had been chained. Still, her fear did not vanish. Her mind whispered that freedom could not be so simple. She had seen too much cruelty to trust in miracles. What if these humans were only taking her to another prison? What if kindness was only a mask, and pain was waiting once again? The questions filled her, but when she looked at Mark, she saw no deceit in his eyes. She wanted to believe, even if her heart still trembled with doubt. As the shuttle broke through the clouds, the sight above stunned her. The sky was no longer covered with smoke and ash. Instead, stars shone brightly, scattered across the endless dark. Rina's eyes widened. She had seen stars before, faint and hidden, but never like this. They were beautiful, glowing like jewels, endless and free. For the first time, she lifted her head fully, staring at the sky without fear. Mark noticed her wonder and smiled softly. He pointed toward the stars, speaking a few quiet words. Rina did not understand the language, but she understood the meaning. He was showing her a world beyond chains. She followed his hand, watching the horizon as the shuttle moved toward the human ship waiting above. The Aurora came into view, its silver shape gleaming against the black of space. It was larger than the shuttle, strong and bright, like a guardian among the stars. To Rina, it looked like something out of a dream. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never thought such a ship could bring safety instead of fear. The shuttle docked with a soft thud. The doors opened, and the humans guided Rina carefully inside. The halls of the Aurora were clean and shining, so different from the dust and stone of her world. She walked slowly, almost afraid to touch anything, as though it might vanish if she reached out. Mark stayed close, making sure she did not fall behind. His presence felt like a shield, steady and sure. But the journey was not over. Alarms sounded across the ship. The Empire had noticed the escape. Their patrol ships had begun to move, closing in quickly. The captain of the Aurora gave orders at once, his voice firm but controlled. The humans hurried to their stations, preparing for a chase. Rina felt panic rise again. She thought of the overseers, of chains, of punishment. She curled her hands tightly, bracing for the return of pain. But Mark knelt beside her seat. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her. His eyes met hers, and though she could not understand his words, his calm tone carried a promise. They would not give her back. The Aurora's engines roared as the ship turned sharply, racing away from the planet. The stars stretched into lines as they prepared for faster travel. But before the jump, enemy ships appeared behind them, firing streams of light. The ship shook, and Rina gasped, clinging to her seat once more. The humans did not panic. Their hands moved swiftly over the controls, their voices calm but strong. The Aurora's shields absorbed the attacks, though the ship rattled with each strike. Mark stayed near Rina, keeping his balance easily even as the floor trembled. His presence was like an anchor in the storm. The enemy ships pressed closer. For a moment, Rina feared they would be captured again. But then, with a final surge of power, the Aurora leapt forward into faster-than-light travel. The stars blurred, and the enemy ships vanished from view. The alarms grew quiet. The shaking stopped. Silence filled the ship. The humans sighed in relief, some smiling at their narrow escape. Rina's body sagged with exhaustion. She had not realized how tightly she had been holding her breath. Slowly, she let it out, her chest rising and falling with uneven rhythm. She was safe for now. Mark crouched beside her again. He spoke softly, pointing to himself, then to her. This time, he repeated his name more clearly, waiting for her to understand. Rina hesitated, then whispered it back. Mark. The word felt strange on her tongue, but it carried warmth. He smiled at her, not with pity but with encouragement. For the first time, Rina felt the walls around her heart weaken. The escape had been dangerous, the future still uncertain, but something had changed within her. She was no longer only a slave waiting for pain. She was someone who had been lifted from the dust, carried into the stars, and given a chance to believe that freedom might be real. She looked once more through the window at the endless night sky. The stars stretched before her, vast and open. Her heart trembled, but within the trembling was a spark of courage. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing: she was not alone anymore. The first night on the human ship felt strange to Rina. She sat in a quiet room with soft lights and clean walls, so different from the stone chambers of the mines. A warm blanket lay across her shoulders, and there was food in front of her, real food, not the thin rations she had always known. Yet even with these comforts, her heart could not rest. She kept looking toward the door, expecting an overseer to enter at any moment, shouting, striking, demanding. But no one came. The only person who entered was Mark, carrying a small tray of fruit and water. He placed it on the table without a word, then stepped back so she would not feel cornered. Rina watched him carefully, her eyes full of doubt. She did not move toward the food. She waited, certain there was some hidden punishment if she reached for it too quickly. Mark noticed her hesitation. He took one piece of fruit, bit into it himself, and then smiled softly. Only after seeing him eat did Rina slowly pick up a piece. Her hands trembled as she lifted it to her lips. The taste surprised her. It was sweet, soft, and fresh. She had not eaten anything like it since childhood. For a moment, her eyes widened, almost shining. Then she quickly lowered her gaze again, afraid to reveal too much. The days that followed were filled with confusion for her. The humans treated her with kindness, something she had never known. They offered her clothes that were not torn, food that was not spoiled, and water that was clean. They spoke to her gently, though she did not understand their words. No one shouted. No one raised a hand against her. Yet the habits of pain clung tightly. Each time a door opened suddenly, she flinched. Each time someone moved quickly, her body tensed, bracing for a strike that never came. Mark noticed all of this. He never grew impatient. Instead, he stayed close but not too close, giving her space yet showing her she was not alone. He began to teach her small words in his language. He would point to himself and say Mark. Then he would point to her, waiting. At first, she did not answer. But after days of trying, she finally whispered, Rina. His smile in that moment was brighter than anything she had seen. It was not the cruel smile of overseers who mock suffering, but a smile of respect, as if her name carried meaning. She whispered it again, a little louder this time. Rina. He repeated it back, nodding, as though promising he would remember it always. Slowly, she began to learn other words. Simple ones, like water, food, and safe. Each word felt heavy to her, yet precious, like stones carried from the deepest mine but polished into gems. Mark was patient, repeating them gently until she understood. He never scolded her for mistakes. Instead, he encouraged her with quiet nods and warm eyes. One evening, the ship passed near a cluster of stars. Mark guided Rina to the observation deck, where wide windows showed the endless space outside. She stood frozen at the sight. The stars shone brighter than she had ever seen, filling the darkness with silver light. Her breath caught in wonder. She pressed her hands to the glass, her eyes wide, forgetting fear for the first time in many years. Mark stood beside her, watching her reaction. He pointed to the stars and spoke a word. She repeated it softly, not knowing its meaning but feeling its beauty. For that single moment, the weight of her past slipped away. She was not a captive staring at the ground. She was a soul gazing at the universe, free to dream. But even with these new moments of peace, shadows of fear remained. At night, she often woke in silence, her body shaking with memories of the mines. She would curl into herself, expecting pain. When Mark found her this way, he never forced her to speak. He simply sat nearby, keeping watch until she felt calm enough to rest again. His presence became a shield not just against danger, but against the darkness inside her. The crew also showed kindness. Some offered her food with warm smiles. Others gave her soft blankets or small trinkets, hoping to make her feel welcome. Rina did not always know how to respond, but she began to see that not all beings in the galaxy lived to cause pain. Slowly, she started to believe in something she had thought impossible: trust. One day, as Mark taught her new words, he held out his hand and said, "Friend." She tilted her head, uncertain. He repeated it, pointing to himself, then to her. Finally, with hesitation, she whispered, "Friend." The sound felt strange, but when he smiled proudly, her chest filled with warmth. It was the first time she had ever called anyone a friend. In that moment, Rina realized something important. She was not just surviving anymore. She was learning to live. She was learning that life could hold more than chains and pain. She was learning that trust, though fragile, could grow like a seed breaking through stone. Her journey was not over. Fear still lived in her heart, and the Empire still hunted them. But now she had a name spoken with kindness, a word for friend, and a glimpse of a world beyond suffering. Step by step, she was discovering that she was more than a slave. She was Rina, and she was beginning to believe she mattered. Days passed on the Aurora, and Rina slowly began to feel a little stronger. She was still quiet, still cautious, but her eyes no longer carried only fear. She had food, clean clothes, and rest. Most of all, she had Mark, who stayed close and showed her patience. Each day, he taught her new words, and each night he made sure she was safe. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was more than just a worker in chains. But peace never lasted long in a galaxy ruled by empires. The humans had freed not only Rina but also a handful of others from her world. The Empire did not forgive such acts. It soon became clear that enemy ships were searching, hunting across the stars for the Aurora. The humans knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire found them. One evening, the crew gathered in the main chamber. The captain stood before them, his face serious. A large map of the stars glowed on the wall, showing the paths of enemy patrols. "We have a choice," he said firmly. "We can run, or we can strike where it matters. If we run, the Empire will still hunt us. If we strike, we may give these people a chance at freedom." The room was filled with heavy silence. To challenge the Empire was dangerous. Their fleets were vast, their power unmatched. But to turn away felt wrong, especially after what they had seen. The freed captives, including Rina, listened quietly from the side. She did not understand all the words, but she understood the weight in the humans' voices. Mark spoke after a long pause. His tone was steady. "We cannot leave them. If we run, the Empire will tighten its grip. If we act, we can weaken it." His words carried conviction, and many of the crew nodded. Rina's chest tightened. She feared what he was suggesting. Fighting the Empire seemed impossible. Her people had tried once, and they had been crushed. But then she remembered his hand lifting her from the ground, his voice calm even in danger. He had risked himself for her when she was nothing but a broken slave. If he could be brave, could she not be brave too? Later that night, Rina sat alone in the quiet of the observation deck. The stars stretched before her, endless and bright. She thought of her family, of her lost brother, of all the faces she had left behind in the mines. Her heart ached. She wished she could forget the pain, but the memories would not leave her. They were carved into her soul. Mark found her there. He stepped quietly, sitting near her but not too close. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. He waited patiently, as always, giving her space to speak. Slowly, with halting words, she said, "Empire, weak, place." Mark frowned, leaning forward. "Weak," he repeated. She nodded. Her language skills were still small, but she tried again. "Empire, power here," she pointed on the star map displayed on the glass. Then she shifted her finger. "But here, weak." Mark's eyes widened slightly. He understood. She knew something about the Empire's structure. Her years as a captive had given her knowledge of their routes, their mines, their patrols. Information that could make a difference. Rina hesitated, fear pressing at her chest. To speak against the Empire was dangerous. But she thought of the people still trapped, carrying loads until their bodies broke. She thought of the overseer's whips, the endless silence of her people. And then she thought of Mark's promise in his gentle touch. Slowly, she raised her chin. "Help, people." Mark's expression softened. He placed a hand over his heart, then pointed to her. "Together," he said. She repeated the word softly, "together." The next day, the humans prepared. With Rina's guidance, they planned a strike against one of the Empire's supply stations, a place that kept the chains tight on her world. It was not a full fleet they faced, only a smaller outpost, but even so, the risk was great. Still, the humans moved with determination. Rina watched them, her chest filled with both fear and pride. She had never seen anyone fight for her people before. She felt a part of something larger now, not just a survivor but someone who could help. Even if her hands shook, she refused to turn back. When the Aurora neared the outpost, alarms rang once more. Enemy ships moved to intercept. The crew hurried to their stations, weapons primed, shields raised. Rina sat strapped into her seat, her heart pounding. She whispered her own name softly, reminding herself that she was more than a captive now. She was Rina. The battle began with fire and thunder. The Aurora dodged and struck back, weaving through enemy lines. Rina gripped the seat, her breath sharp. Each time the ship shook, she thought it might fall apart. Yet through it all, Mark's voice remained calm, giving orders, steady as a rock in the storm. His courage gave her courage. As the fight raged, the humans used the knowledge she had given them. They struck at weak points in the Empire's defenses, and slowly, the balance began to shift. The outpost trembled under the assault, its power breaking. Rina watched in awe. The Empire was not invincible after all. With unity, with courage, even giants could fall. By the end of the battle, the Aurora stood battered but unbroken. The outpost was in ruins, its grip loosened. For the first time, the Empire had been struck back by those who cared for freedom. Rina sat in silence, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She turned to Mark, who looked at her with steady eyes. She whispered a single word she had only just learned. "Hope." Mark smiled, and for the first time, Rina believed the word truly belonged to her. The Aurora floated in silence after the battle. The crew moved through the ship, repairing what they could, patching metal, and tending to the wounded. The lights flickered in places, and the smell of smoke lingered in the halls, but the ship was alive. They had won. Rina sat in the med bay, her hands resting on her knees. Her body trembled from the memory of the battle, but her heart beat with something new. She had seen the Empire lose. She had seen chains broken. For years, all she had known was pain, but now she had seen hope become real. Mark entered the room quietly. He was tired, his uniform torn, but his eyes still carried calm strength. He pulled a chair beside her and sat. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Rina spoke softly, searching for the right words. "Empire can fall." Mark nodded. "Yes. But not in one day. It will take many battles, many choices." She lowered her head, thinking of her people still trapped. The victory here was only one step. The Empire's shadow still stretched across the stars. But for the first time, she believed that shadow could be pushed back. The next days were filled with preparation. News spread across nearby systems that the Empire had lost an outpost. Small groups of people began to whisper about rebellion. Some even sent secret messages to the Aurora, offering aid, or asking for guidance. The humans had lit a spark, and it was beginning to grow. Rina trained with the crew. At first, her hands shook when she held a tool or tried to follow instructions. She was not used to freedom, not used to being trusted. But Mark stayed with her, teaching patiently. He gave her tasks, simple ones at first, checking wires, carrying supplies. Every time she completed one, he smiled, and she felt stronger. One day, during training, she turned to him and asked, "Why help me?" Her voice was unsure, but her eyes searched his face. Mark paused, setting down the tool in his hand. "Because you deserve more than pain," he said quietly. "Because everyone does." His words sank into her heart. No one had ever told her she deserved anything before. She carried those words with her like a hidden flame. The captain of the Aurora soon called another meeting. The crew gathered, the map of the stars glowing once more. The captain's voice was firm but hopeful. "The Empire will not ignore what we have done. They will come again, stronger. But we have shown them that they are not untouchable. We have a choice now, to run, or to keep fighting." Rina sat at the back, her hands tight in her lap. She listened as the crew debated. Some wanted to stay hidden, to protect what they had won. Others wanted to strike again, to keep the pressure on the Empire. At last, Rina rose to her feet. The room quieted, all eyes turning to her. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. "My people, still in chains. Many worlds, still suffer. If we run, pain continues. If we fight, maybe hope grows." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She was not a soldier, not a leader, but she was someone who had lived under the Empire's cruelty. The crew listened, and many nodded slowly. The captain gave a small smile. "Then we fight. Not for glory, not for conquest, but for freedom." From that day, the Aurora became more than just a ship. It became a symbol. Rina worked side by side with the humans, learning, growing, and sharing what she knew about the Empire's roots and weaknesses. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a part of something greater. Weeks later, the Aurora led a mission to free another group of captives. This time, Rina stood on the landing ramp beside Mark when they entered the dark halls of the mine. She saw her own reflection in the faces of the prisoners, tired, broken, afraid. But when they looked at her and saw that she was free, their eyes lit with a spark. "Come," she said in her broken but steady voice, holding out her hand. "You are free." Tears filled their eyes as they followed her out into the light of the stars. For Rina, it was like healing a wound that had never closed. She had once been the one in chains, waiting for someone to lift her up. Now, she was that someone for others. After the mission, the crew celebrated quietly in the common room. Music played softly, and laughter filled the air. Rina sat beside Mark, watching the others smile and talk. For so long, she had believed joy was something her kind could never know. Now, she was living in it. She turned to Mark. "I was lost," she said slowly. "Now I found." Mark's smile was warm. "You were never lost, Rina. You were waiting. And now, you're free." She looked around the room, the crew, the laughter, the light. She thought of the stars waiting outside, full of danger but also full of promise. She thought of her people, of the battles still ahead, and of the words she had once whispered in fear but now carried with strength. "Hope," she said again, and this time her voice was strong. The Aurora sailed on into the endless sky, carrying with it not only humans but also those who had once been broken. Together, they moved forward, step by step, battle by battle, toward a new dawn where no one would live in chains again. And in the heart of it all was Rina, who had once known only pain, but who now carried the fire of freedom.